All right, afternoon, everybody. My name is Daniel Brown, and this is the talk on retail store and point of sale penetration testing. So a little bit about me. I was born and raised in Baton Rouge, Louisiana, and graduated from LSU, and then most recently moved about a year ago to Houston, Texas. Now, while I was in college, I spent a lot of time working on computers for various different companies, everything from laptops, desktops, registers, tablets, gaming systems, cell phones, you name it, I probably worked on it. And that kind of led me towards the networking side of things. And so I was able to find a small company that did information security. And as you can imagine, that includes penetration testing. I found I had an aptitude for it and found out I really enjoyed it. And over the years, I've done everything from external pen tests, web apps, internals, you name it, and as you might imagine, retail. That's why we're here today. Currently, I work for PSC, and we specialize in doing PCI assessments. However, we certainly do assessments on behalf of other regulators as well. But PCI is kind of our bread and butter. So in order to really understand why I'm going to be doing the penetration test in the way that I am, you kind of have to first understand a little bit about PCI. I promise this isn't going to be an in-depth dive, but a couple of key points here that might be useful to you. Obviously, PCI stands for the payment card industry, and it is a regulatory body made up of the 4 major card brands and anybody who accepts those type of payments and processes them. Another term that you need to know is CDE, or Cardholder Data Environment. And as I mentioned a moment ago, this is anything that processes, stores, or transmits cardholder data. And as you might imagine, this includes retail stores. What's interesting, though, is that anything that shares a subnet with something that does one of those key actions is going to also be considered in scope as far as being considered your CDE. The other thing you need to understand about PCI is that segmentation is absolutely king as far as penetration testing is concerned. And what I mean by that is you can see by this diagram. Now, please excuse the diagram. It's very simplistic, but I think it will drive home the point I'm trying to make. At the top there, you have the corporate environment. This is your IT departments, your general domain users, and the everyday employees. At the bottom, you've got the CDE. You'll see that the retail store is definitely included in that area, but it's also got other things, servers, SQL, firewalls, things of that nature. Now, normally in a pen test, you're going to start on the corporate side of things and try to work your way into the cardholder data environment or production environment, whichever way you want to word it. But what I want you to understand is that the CDE at the bottom is where you're going to be starting with the retail testing. Now, no direct access from the corporate environment should be allowed to anywhere in the cardholder data environment without first going through some kind of jump box implementation or full tunnel VPN or something along those lines. So hopefully that wasn't too boring, but you'll understand why that's important here in just a moment. So the next thing about PCI is what are we trying to accomplish here? What is our success criteria for a retail store penetration test? Well, as you might imagine, capturing clear text credentials or PAN data of any kind during transmission would certainly constitute a win on that point. I think everybody might feel pretty good if that happens. But another way is if you're able to compromise a point of sale system. And it's not just you got local admin on it, but were you able to find anything if they're using local SQL databases? Were you able to take the information from that point of sale system and actually use it across a wide variety of stores or elsewhere in the CDE? And then finally, we've got key logging up there. Now, you might be wondering why key logging is that crucial if you've already got local admin rights on that particular system. However, what you have to keep in mind is that if the credit card terminal goes down, a lot of times their failover may be manually typing in that credit card information. And if you're key logging, obviously you've got credit card data, and you can certainly consider that a success. The final thing that we consider in our success criteria is, were you able to compromise other CDE resources from your specific location? So if they don't have segmentation set up correctly, and you can reach out to other systems, maybe they have shared creds, you never know, but that would also certainly result in meeting your success criteria. So because all of these all the credit card information is coming from this retail location, the clients are certainly going to try to protect it. And as penetration testers, we might view it as, what are they doing to try to stop us? And they're doing quite a few things. The first one is locking things down in kiosk mode. And if you've never worked on a retail system, all kiosk mode really means is that they limit access to potentially high-value targets, such as the start menu, command prompts, file systems in general. That's not a comprehensive list, but you get the general idea of what they're trying to do with this kiosk mode. Anything that the normal user does not need, they don't have access to. Occasionally you run into BIOS passwords. It's not extremely common, and I'll explain that in just a minute, but it is something that I have run into before. Certainly application whitelisting, whatever provider you want to use for that, prevents you from loading payloads and things of that nature. They may very well have something with that. They may not, though. No removable storage devices prevents you from loading your payloads that way. You might be thinking to yourself, well, even if they block access to that, I can use something like a Bash Bunny or a Rubber Ducky. We'll touch on that a little bit later, but for now, they're usually just trying to prevent you from actually mounting a mass storage device of some kind. And then finally, port security, shutting down the unused ports, trying to prevent you from ever getting network access in the first place. And if they've done this correctly, the only way that you might be able to get on the network is to actually unplug one of the retail systems, plug in your own, or install a switch, something of that nature. They may have other controls that prevent that, but in general, basic port security is usually implemented on some of these engagements. All right, with that out of the way, let's talk about the actual pen testing of the environment. And the first thing you're obviously going to need to do is you're going to need to get network access. Now, I mentioned they shut down unused ports. However, what you see up there in the back corner is an Ethernet port. Now, that Ethernet port for this particular situation was out in a public area. It's where people are walking around. It's like behind a clothes rack or something of that nature. It's probably shut down, or you would hope it would be, but it's certainly worth plugging in to find out. If that doesn't work, in the back, they usually have something like that rat's nest up there, some basic networking equipment just to get the job done. In this particular case, they don't have anything in like a lockbox, but even if they do have a lockbox, remember, these aren't IT people. These are retail people, these are salespeople, things of that nature. So 9 times out of 10, that key is going to be in that key lock, which, thank you. I do want to pause here for just a moment and mention that these are white box engagements that I'm talking about today. So PCI at this time does not necessarily require social engineering, especially for the retail environment, but it's still very important to relay to your client what an unauthorized user could actually do. You may be allowed to be there, but if that network port in the general area was open, they now have network access and can continue on from there. So once you get network access, there's one thing you should really keep in mind, and that these retail locations are potentially thousands of brick and mortar stores spread across the world or the US. It may be smaller, but it could be extremely large. I'm sure you can think of several off the top of your head. And not only do they have such a wide network, but they usually have a very small dedicated team that may just be a part of the IT staff in general, but they've got a group that is going to manage this, and it's usually a very, very, very small number. So with that in mind, that's going to be very important. Ease of use. Absolutely is going to be crucial. And I don't mean lazy. I mean, when you're trying to manage thousands of systems, as the sysadmins and IT personnel might know, you're going to have to do some certain things. Maybe you use a shared account name and password across the various locations. Things of that nature. That's something to keep in mind, because chances are the environment is not as complex as you may think it is. So with that in mind, the actual network testing is not that different from the internal pen testing. Enumeration, absolutely. What's on your local subnet? What's out there? What can you directly interact with before you do anything else? Certainly, you want to look for low-hanging fruit, make notes about whether they're domain tied, all of your basic enumeration stuff. But most importantly, figure out what the heck you're going to be attacking. Is it going to be Windows 7? Is it going to be some version of Windows embedded? Over half the time, it's going to be Windows XP. And that's why I put something as old as MS-08 up there, because it still is out there. So once you've done your basic network enumeration, you can go ahead and start your actual point of sale testing. And your first goal should definitely be to try to break out of kiosk mode. What can you do from there? My personal recommendation is to open a Windows program, any common Windows program. It truly is as simple as that. Your end goal for this part of the testing is to get some kind of command prompt, whether that be with local user privs or whether that be, hopefully, with system level privileges. And I go back to that because auto logon may be enabled out of ease of use from the IT staff. You know, all these things are going to start to tie together. My personal recommendation, try to get to Internet Explorer. We're going to go into depth about why, but there are other ways to go about this, but this is by far my favorite. What you'll see here is just a basic file explorer, and what I would like you to look at is on the left-hand side, you'll notice that my computer is missing. That's probably going to be there on all your local systems or all of your personal systems. Well, they've done an okay job of trying to lock that down. But I do also want you to note that my mouse is hovering over the Add Shortcut button. And the reason it's hovering over that Add Shortcut button is because we all probably know the location of cmd.exe. And even if you don't, 5 seconds of Googling will tell you where it is. Once you create that shortcut, right-click, open, you might have a command shell that way. One other thing you may want to note is that up there in the Internet Options, I said Internet Explorer. Internet Options is my favorite way to get a Explorer window. There's a nifty little import certificate feature on the Privacy tab. Works out great. Let's say this works. Best case scenario, this works out for you. In this particular case, I had system level privileges, so went ahead and added myself as a local administrator and connected back to a share I was hosting on my network attached box. From there, go about your post-exploitation. Have some fun. But let's take a step back and assume it didn't work. Let's assume they've done a better job than most of locking things down. What are the other ways you can try to get to that file manager? Certainly hotkeys. Again, we're talking about mass rollouts of various different Windows systems across a wide actual physical area. Windows U, those are some of the favorites. Also, though, don't forget to take a look at the hotkeys, whether or not maybe it was a third party that actually built these systems and sent them out. You never know. You never know what may be tied to these systems. So give it a shot. It takes half a second of your time. I also would like to point out that whatever opens, about pages are your best friend. And the reason I say that is quite simply, somewhere in those about pages at the bottom, there's a little hyperlink that says read the privacy statement online. Well, guess what that's going to do? It's going to open up an Internet Explorer browser, rinse and repeat, go back to what we were talking about earlier. So again, let's play devil's advocate here and assume you can't get out. You absolutely can't get out. What are you supposed to do now? I recommend you get physical with it. Turn it off. Load an alternate operating system. Personally, I prefer some USB drive with Kali Linux on it. It's got some great tools on it. More than one way to do this, though, obviously. Once you're in that environment, some things you can do. Off crack. If you weren't able to get credentials before, you can sure get them now. Obviously, if they have full disk encryption, this won't work, but that's not usually the case. Once you get those credentials, go back to your attacking system, get your shell, have some fun. If they've got application whitelisting enabled, I recommend you change a folder name. I promise you, if you go change that, in this particular case, bit9, if you go change that bit9 folder to something else, it won't launch when Windows launches, I assure you. So that can be a surefire way if that's being particularly stubborn. If you don't necessarily want to or don't need to modify a folder, you can modify a file. In this example right here, all I've done is I have retained a copy of magnify.exe and just renamed it .old so that I can put everything back. That's very important. And basically, I just copied over cmd.exe and renamed it. I left the original one there, but that's the case. And the reason I'm doing that is because from the Windows logon prompt, in the bottom left-hand corner, you've got the Ease of Access Center. Check that magnifier box, and boom, there's your shell right there. What's really cool about this method, actually, though, is that when it launches, it's going to launch with system-level privileges every time if you've gone through this method. So it can save you a little bit of headache if you don't necessarily want to go through some of the other trouble, but regardless, it'll get you there in the end if you need it to. So far, we've talked about getting network access, doing your basic network testing, and then doing your point-of-sale testing. What do you do now? I just call it network testing 2.0. And the reason I do that is because you are now armed with a lot more information than you previously had, whether that be credentials, whatever the case may be. You now have the ability to do more effective network testing. For example, do you have a shell? Were you able to get a shell back on your system? If so, start looking at SQL databases. Do they have default passwords? Do they have no passwords? Is there credit card data in there? Can you find passwords that you didn't previously have, or password hashes that you didn't previously had? If you are feeling particularly adventurous, there are tools out there that will allow you to search the entire file system for credit card numbers in clear text. I would highly recommend, though, that you do a loon check. And for no other reason than after it gets through going through all those various config files, 16-digit strings can all start to look the same. So eliminate some of your false positives by doing that. But basically, just do your normal exploitation from there. Once you've done that, or while you're doing it, however you do your pen test methodology from this standpoint, I would also recommend that you also do segmentation checks. So do they have egress rules in place that'll prevent you from reaching the corporate network? If not, you may be able to get up there and then use a pivot and try to get to a different area you didn't previously have access to. If it's segmented correctly, you won't be able to, but you never know. Can you communicate with additional stores? Going back to ease of use for IT staff, these stores are usually divided into Class Cs, all of them. And do yourself a favor, just expand out, use MassScan or Nmap or something like that, expand out to a Class B, see if you can communicate. If you really don't want to put that much network traffic on there, one common thing that I run into is that most of the time the fourth octet of the systems, the retail systems, will be the same across various locations. So you can certainly utilize that to your advantage to try to get that timing down, especially if it's a very large organization. Can you pivot or get direct access to other CDE resources? Talks about going back out to corporate. Now stay within the CDE. Can you reach some of the SQL servers? Can you reach a domain controller? What can you do from there? This is just a basic illustration illustrating what I was just saying about moving laterally in the CDE. You never know what you're going to find, and widespread exploitation is certainly meeting your success criteria. Based off the information that you've just gotten, can you expand the scope from there? Were you able to identify that they're using a common password across all of the systems in the retail environment? Were you able to do that? Do they share usernames, if not passwords? Do they use a simple naming convention? All these things can be extremely valuable to your client. One thing I would like to point out, though, is that if you do expand the scope, you need to relay to the client why it's a problem. And ultimately, if one store gets compromised, it's not good. It's really not good. However, it's not going to make that big of a dent. However, if they were able to compromise one store and use that information and expand out to every store or a large subset of stores, now you've got a huge problem on your hands. So we've gone through some of the basic steps of how to perform a retail penetration test. And next you have to ask yourself, well, great, I've got all this information, I was able to win, I feel good about myself. What in the world am I going to tell the client? And I wish I had a cut and dry answer for you, but it really is entirely dependent on how you got in. And you have to use your general knowledge about pen testing, your general knowledge about networking, computers, all of those things in order to make the recommendations. With that said, here are some very, very common ones out there. You can recommend a BIOS password. That would certainly prevent you from booting to a bootable USB drive. However, this may cause a problem with their ease of access and for them to effectively do their job. Not to mention, it might be difficult to roll out retroactively. You can certainly recommend additional kiosk lockdown measures. However you broke out, relay that to them and brainstorm with them about ways that could have been prevented. It may just be one key thing. Maybe restricting access to internet options really would have prevented this. You don't know. So bring it up, try to figure it out with them. The next two, I specifically mark out as too expensive, but they are fantastic options. Full disk encryption is great, but again, very, very expensive, and certainly NACs can be expensive. Not to mention, NACs can introduce problems of their own. The one I'm thinking of off the top of my head, So Kindly every 3 hours will, if you're running Responder or something, will provide you with NTL MV2 creds. 9 times out of 10, they're DA. So it's very lovely of them. We appreciate it when they do that. You might want to recommend that they remove certain systems from the domain, or just remove the fact that all all point of sale and register systems are no longer domain tied. Again, though, now they may start using scripts, which depending on who's writing the scripts, that may not be the best scenario. This isn't one that comes around too often, but it's certainly something to consider depending on how big the problem was and what exactly those problems were. And then finally, segmentation. And a lot of this can be mitigated with segmentation simply because, like I said, if you compromise one store, it's not good. As long as you can't compromise them all, you're in much better shape. So what does the future look like for retail store pen testing? And in my eyes, it's pretty simple, and it's that. And you may be thinking to yourself, we use these already, what in the world are you talking about? You're right, we certainly use pen pads, credit card terminals to conduct our everyday transactions, but most of them aren't running full point-to-point encryption on them. So if a client is able to implement a point-to-point encryption solution, and in terms of PCI, it's got to be an approved vendor for this, they can actually mark their stores as out of scope. So all of these findings are not that big of a deal anymore to them, because at the end of the day, you can't compromise credit card data due to the way the tokenization is occurring between the pen pad and the payment processor. The only problem with this is that it's extremely slow to be adopted. The reason, in my eyes, is that it's incredibly expensive to do, especially across a wide variety of stores, maybe brands, whatever the case may be. Even the same even the same retail brands may have different types of pen pads and things of that nature, as you can imagine. So it's going to be slow. My guess is this type of pen testing that I talked about today is going to be out there for quite a while, and there's still going to be a need for it, because I don't see point-to-point encryption for all retailers happening anytime soon. I hope I'm wrong. It'd be better for all of us as consumers, not necessarily pen testers, but as consumers. So I want to stress, though, that this is just how I do retail store pen testing. The goals for success criteria are the same, but I can tell you from this gentleman sitting in the front who's a member of our team, he may do things very differently than I do, but at the end of the day, our goals are the same. We still try to accomplish the same things, and I don't claim that this is the only way to do it, but hopefully when you get into a retail environment, you can now be armed with a little bit better information, especially if you've never done it before. You know where to start, you know where to go. And then honestly, if you're doing normal internal pen tests on a day-to-day basis, throwing in a retail pen test is a lot of fun. It breaks up the usualness, it lets you be creative, and it really can put a smile on your face when you are able to do widespread compromise. I know it doesn't sound good, but you're there to try to help at the end of the day. I assure you that's why we're there. So that's pretty much it for the talk. If you'd like some more information, I don't think we have too much time for questions, but I'll be here all week. Or all weekend, I should say. Please come out and chat with me if you've got some war stories of your own. I'd love to hear them, especially about the retail environment. You can find me on Twitter right there, or there's my email, and of course the contact information for the company that I work for. Thank you all for your time, and I've got some flashlights here if anybody's interested.